In the winter of 1879, a father sold his daughter to pay a debt. This is not a metaphor. There was no poetry in it, no dramatic music, no moment of hesitation where he looked at her and felt the weight of what he was doing. There was a desk. There was a document. There was a man on one side of that desk who needed money he didn't have, and a man on the other side who had more money than he would ever need and wanted something else entirely. The something else was Isolde Caldwell, 22 years old, present in the next room behind a closed door, while her future was decided in 40 minutes. Now, I want to be careful here, because it would be very easy to tell this story as if what happened to Isolde was exceptional, as if her father was a uniquely terrible man in a uniquely terrible moment. He wasn't. In 1879 England, a daughter was, in almost every legal and practical sense, an asset. She could not own property. She could not sign contracts. She could not appear in court without a male representative. She moved from her father's house to her husband's house, and the transaction was dressed in white and called a wedding. And everyone agreed it was a beautiful thing. What Lord Caldwell did was cruder than most, but it was not different in kind. Isolde knew this. She had always known this. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, sitting behind that closed door, listening to the muffled voices and the scratching of a pen, was that the man on the other side of that desk was not what he seemed. She thought she was being delivered to a monster. She was half right. But monsters, it turns out, are rarely the whole story. So when her father sat across from her on a gray November morning and explained that there were debts, significant ones, and that a gentleman named Julian Vane, Duke of Ravenswood, had made a proposal that represented the only viable solution, Isolde felt the particular recognition of a woman who has watched this happen before. "Tell me the details," she said. "The name, the terms. What exactly has been agreed, and what is still to be decided?" He told her. She listened to every word. "Will you be able to keep the house?" she asked. Yes. That's rather the point of the good. Then my sister won't have to leave her school." She stood up, said she'd need 3 days, and left the room before he could answer. She gave herself 1 hour. This was a rule she had made for herself sometime in the years after her mother died. 1 hour with whatever the thing was, grief or fear or rage, alone and honest, without performing anything for anyone. She had known her father was capable of this. She had watched him be capable of smaller versions of it for years. What she hadn't expected was the hope, the small, irrational, apparently unkillable hope that had survived 8 years of evidence and still managed to be there, this morning, to be disappointed. She was angry at herself for having it, but she made a decision. Not about Vane. Something smaller and more important than that. She was not going to be her dead mother. Not because her mother had done anything wrong. Clara Caldwell had done everything right by every standard the world had given her, and the world had taken everything from her anyway. But Isolde had arrived at a conclusion. It didn't work. Not for the woman doing it. She was not going to be diminished. She sat with that decision until she believed it. Then she began to pack. Now, Julian Vane. The Duke of Ravenswood was 34 years old in the winter of 1879. Competent, responsible, well-managed in every sense. And for the past 3 years, a man who had made a decision and been living inside it. The decision. He was not going to want anything again. Not with that openness, that willingness to be changed by another person. He had done that once with a woman named Catherine Marsh. who had said yes to his proposal and 3 months later married someone else. He had read her letter 3 times, placed it in the fire, and watched it burn. Then he had closed the place inside him where she had been, methodically, thoroughly, and told himself it was simply maturity. What he hadn't admitted was that he'd also become someone who needed to keep confirming the closing had held. This was why, when Lord Caldwell appeared in his study with a debt and a daughter, Julian Vane had agreed. Not for the social connection. A bankrupt lord's daughter was not an advantageous match. Not even, primarily, for his mother's care. Because he wanted to take a woman into his house and feel nothing. He wanted to be unmoved. He did not know, sitting in his study after Lord Caldwell had gone, that he had just invited into his house the one person specifically unsuited to confirming this. She left on a Friday morning in a carriage that Vane had sent. Her father came to see her off and stood at the top of the steps, with the expression of a man who wants to say something and has not been able to locate it. "Write to me about Charlotte," she said. "When she comes home for Christmas, tell her I'm well." She had been going to say something else, something she'd been carrying for 8 years. She decided against it. Some things said in doorways cannot be unsaid. "Take care of the garden," she said instead. "The roses need cutting back before the frost." She got in the carriage and didn't look back. She watched England go past the window, the November fields, the bare trees standing in the cold, with the particular patience of things that have survived worse. And she thought about the way things left unattended in the cold either died or grew wild. She had not decided yet which she intended to be. By the time the carriage turned through the gates of Ravenswood, she had not reached a conclusion. But she had reached something else. She had reached ready. Not happy, not unafraid, just ready. She walked through the front door. Nobody came to meet her, which told her, more precisely than any introduction could have, exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. Nobody came to meet her. Let's sit with that for a moment. Because in 1879, England, when a woman arrived at a house as its new mistress, even in an arrangement as cold as this one, even in a marriage that was a transaction dressed in legal language, there were protocols. There were things that were done, the housekeeper at the door, the introductions, the tour of the house, the careful staging of welcome that said, "You belong here now." Julian Vane did none of it. A footman took her trunk. A maid showed her to a room. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Holt, who had the precise posture of someone who has survived multiple difficult employers by becoming emotionally impenetrable, appeared briefly to inform her that dinner was at 8, that the Dowager Duchess dined in her rooms and received visitors between 10 and noon, and that His Grace was occupied. Isolde stood in the middle of a bedroom that was larger than the entire ground floor of her family's London house, hung with curtains the color of a bruise, and absorbed the word. She had been delivered to this house like a piece of furniture, and the man who had ordered the furniture had not bothered to check whether it had arrived. She unpacked her own trunk. The maid offered. She declined. And she thought about what this opening move meant. Because it was a move. She was certain of that. Julian Vane was not a man who failed to think about what he was doing. The absence of welcome was not carelessness. It was a statement. "You are here on my terms. You will learn that immediately." Isolde placed her mother's small portrait on the bedside table, looked at it for a moment. "I know," she thought. "I see it too." She dressed for dinner. She was not going to be late. The dining room at Ravenswood was built for a different century and a different kind of life. Long table, high ceilings, portraits of vain ancestors gazing down with the collective expression of people who found the present deeply inadequate. The room could seat 30. Tonight it held two place settings, positioned at opposite ends of the table, separated by approximately 15 feet of polished mahogany and everything that had brought them both here. Julian Vane was already seated when she arrived. She had expected something that matched the house, something cold and large and deliberate. What she had not expected was the specific quality of his stillness. He wasn't reading. He wasn't occupied with anything. He was simply sitting, glass of wine in hand, watching the door with the patience of a man who has been watching doors for a very long time and has learned to find something in the waiting. He looked at her when she came in. She looked back, and neither of them said anything for just long enough to make it something. She noted this with the detached accuracy she was deploying as armor, not what she'd constructed in the carriage. She had built a Julian Vane from the available materials, a man who purchased women to manage inconveniences, a man who hadn't come to meet her, a man who had arranged a marriage without the basic decency of appearing at the arrangement. The man at the other end of the table was harder to hold at a distance. Not because he was warm. He wasn't. The room wasn't. Nothing in Ravenswood appeared to be warm. But because he was looking at her with an attention that was almost uncomfortable in its directness, like a man who has set up an experiment and is already evaluating the results. She walked to her end of the table, sat down, placed her napkin in her lap. A footman poured wine. Vane said, "You're not what I expected." His voice was lower than she'd anticipated, even. The voice of a man who has learned to keep everything in the same register so that nothing can be read from the variation. Isolde picked up her wine glass. "I'm not sure what you expected," she said. "You didn't ask." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, a consideration of one. "No," he said. "I didn't. Lord Caldwell described me as, I believe the word was sensible." She set down the glass. "I've always found that word interesting. It tends to mean that a woman has no qualities worth specifying." Vane looked at her across 15 feet of mahogany. "What qualities would you specify?" he said. "I'm observant," she said. "I'm patient when it serves me and impatient when it doesn't. I don't perform emotions I don't feel, and I don't suppress ones I do." A pause. "And I notice things." "What have you noticed?" "That you didn't come to meet me. That the housekeeper gave me information a new mistress of the house should have been given by her husband. That this table could seat 30 people, and you've arranged for us to sit as far apart as architecturally possible." She looked at him directly. "You want me to understand something about the terms of this arrangement. I understand it. You don't need to keep demonstrating." The room was very quiet. Vane set down his glass with a precision that suggested he was thinking very carefully about what to say next. "Most women," he said, "would not say that at the first dinner." "Most women," said Isolde, "have more to lose by saying it. I've already lost the things I had to lose. I find it clarifies the conversation considerably." She picked up her fork. She ate. Julian Vane sat at the other end of the table and looked at her with an expression that she could not read from 15 feet away, and that he, for the first time in a very long time, could not entirely control. She met the Dowager Duchess the following morning at 10 o'clock precisely. She had been told, between 10 and noon, the Duchess receives. The housekeeper had offered nothing beyond the schedule. Vane, who had finished dinner the previous evening with 3 additional sentences and then excused himself with the efficiency of a man closing a meeting, had offered nothing at all. She knocked on the door of the Duchess's suite herself. No maid, no announcement. Knocked and waited. And when the voice came from inside, thin but sharp as a blade, "Come," she went in. The room was nothing like the rest of Ravenswood. The rest of the house was dark, controlled, every surface curated to communicate something about permanence and gravity. This room was lived in. Books everywhere, not arranged, but stacked. A fire, real and generous. Plants on the windowsill, actual plants, green and slightly unruly. Portraits on the wall, smaller ones, personal, the kind you choose yourself rather than inherit. And in a chair by the fire, wrapped in shawls with the layered thoroughness of someone who is always cold, sat Eleanor Vane, Dowager Duchess of Ravenswood. She was 71 years old. She had been beautiful once. You could see the architecture of it even through the years. Her eyes were her son's eyes. Dark, direct, giving nothing away before they were ready to. She was looking at Isolde with an expression of frank and unapologetic assessment. Isolde stood in the doorway and let her look. "Close the door," the Duchess said, "and come here where I can see you properly. These windows are useless in winter." Isolde closed the door and crossed the room and sat in the chair that was clearly intended for visitors, positioned at precisely the right angle, close enough for conversation, far enough for dignity. The Duchess looked at her for a long moment, the look of someone reading something difficult and refusing to skim. "My son," the Duchess said, "did not tell you the truth about why he brought you here." Isolde said, "He told me very little about anything. He told you I needed care, a companion, someone to manage what the housekeepers haven't managed." The Duchess's mouth compressed slightly. "That's true as far as it goes. But it's not why he agreed to the arrangement." Isolde waited. "He agreed," the Duchess said, "because he wanted something to be impervious to. Someone he could be cold toward and watch fail to be affected by it. He has been doing this for 3 years, testing himself against people, against situations, against everything, to confirm that he feels nothing." She paused. "He was engaged once. The woman chose someone else. I imagine you've already begun to understand what that did to him." "I've begun to," Isolde said carefully. "He thinks bringing you here is a kind of experiment." The Duchess's eyes were very steady. "A controlled one. A woman who has no choice but to stay, no resources to leave, no position from which to make demands. The perfect test. If he can be completely unmudged by someone in your position, then he's confirmed what he's been telling himself for 3 years." "And if I am affected by him," Isolde said, "if the experiment produces the wrong result, then he'll make it harder," the Duchess said simply. "He's not a cruel man. I want to be very clear about that. He is not cruel, but he is determined. And determination in a man who has decided not to feel is a dangerous quality." Isolde looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" The Duchess looked back at her with the expression of a woman who has spent 71 years watching people and has arrived at some conclusions. "Because I have had 3 companions in 2 years, and none of them lasted," she said. "And because I watched you come through that door and stand in the middle of this room and let me look at you without flinching and without performing. And I am old, and I am tired, and I do not have time for people who flinch or perform." A pause. And because my son needs someone who won't break. And I am no longer capable of being that person for him. And I am the only one who knows he needs it. The room was very quiet. Isolde thought about her mother, about Clara, who had been good and patient, and who had folded herself smaller and smaller until there was very little left. She thought about the decision she'd made on the edge of her bed 3 days ago. She thought about the word break. I should tell you, Isolde said, that I'm not here to fix your son. I know, said the Duchess, and I'm not here to be broken by him either. I know that too. The Duchess settled back in her chair with the slight relief of someone who has been holding something tightly and has been given permission to set it down. That's rather the point. She reached out her hand, not for a handshake, for the hand itself. The gesture of someone who has decided to trust and is making it physical. Isolde looked at it. The thin fingers, the papery skin, the slight tremor that the Duchess was clearly accustomed to ignoring. She took it. The Duchess's grip was stronger than it looked. Come back tomorrow at 10, she said, and bring something to read, something with substance. I cannot bear the novels they keep leaving me. They treat women as though we have the inner lives of decorative cushions. What would you like? The Duchess considered. Something with weather in it, she said. I find weather clarifying. Isolde almost smiled. She caught it just in time. She stood, gently released the hand, and moved to the door. Miss Caldwell. She turned. The Duchess was looking at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite admiration, and was possibly both at once. He's watching, she said quietly. He's always watching. He'll want to know how this went. A pause. Don't tell him it went well. Make him wonder. Isolde looked at her for a moment. I wasn't going to tell him anything, she said. The Duchess smiled. A real one. The full thing. The kind that showed what her face must have been at 30. Good girl, she said. He found her in the library that afternoon. Not by accident. She had come to understand, in the 24 hours she'd been in the house, that Julian Vane did very few things by accident. The library was, she had been told by Mrs. Holt, who was beginning to thaw by approximately 1 degree per day, His Grace's private domain. Not formally off limits, but understood, in the way that certain spaces in certain houses are understood, to be his. She had gone there because it had the best books and the best light, and she was not going to organize her life around spaces she was afraid to occupy. She was reading when he came in. She heard him stop in the doorway, a pause, very brief. The pause of a man who was not expecting to find someone and is recalibrating. And she kept reading. She had found a copy of George Eliot that someone had clearly started and not finished. A bookmark abandoned 40 pages in. And she was past the bookmark now and not inclined to stop. He came in. She heard him move to the desk, his desk, the large one by the window, and sit. Papers. The sound of a man working. She read. He worked. The fire between them did its job. 15 minutes passed. You went to see my mother, he said. Not a question. I did, she said. She did not look up from the book. And she's remarkable. She turned a page. You should spend more time with her. A silence. I spend considerable time with my mother, Vane said, with the precise flatness of a man controlling an irritation. You manage her, Isolde said. It's different. Now she looked up. He was watching her from across the room with the same measuring expression as the night before, the experiment evaluating look. She's not an estate problem. She doesn't need to be administered. She needs to be talked to. I talked to her. About what? He said nothing. When did you last ask her something? Isolde said. Not about her health, not about whether she needs anything. Something real. Something you actually wanted to know. The measuring expression did something. It didn't break. Nothing about Julian Vane broke easily. She was already understanding that. But it shifted. Something behind it moved, very slightly, like a change of pressure in a sealed room. You've been here one day, he said. I'm aware. You know very little about this house or the people in it. Less than I will, she agreed. But I know what I saw this morning. And I know the difference between a man who talks to his mother and a man who checks on her. She went back to the book. He didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice had a different quality. Not warmer, not that, but less controlled, more real. What else did she tell you? He said. Isolde kept her eyes on the page. To bring something with weather in it tomorrow, she said. She finds weather clarifying. A silence. That's all. That's what I'm going to tell you, she said pleasantly. The rest is between her and me. She heard, she was almost certain she heard, the smallest yawn from across the room. Not quite a laugh, the ghost of one. Something that had started to be a laugh and had been recalled just in time. She turned another page. Julian Vane returned to his papers. But he didn't leave the library, and she noticed that too. She had trouble sleeping that night, not from fear or not primarily, but from the particular overstimulation of a mind that had taken in too much in too short a time and was refusing to be quiet about it. She lay in the enormous bed in the curtain-bruised room and went through what she knew. The house. Large, cold, running with the efficiency of a well-managed machine and the warmth of one. Every servant competent, every system functioning, nothing out of place, and yet something profoundly absent. The quality of a place where the right things are done and the human things are not. The Duchess. Sharp, warm, frightened for her son in the way of someone who loves something and can see clearly what's happening to it and cannot stop it. The handshake. Don't tell him it went well. Make him wonder. Vane. The dinner, the library, the 15 feet of mahogany, and then the same room, different distance. The thing that had almost been a laugh. She thought about Catherine Marsh. She tried to construct her. What kind of woman leaves a man like that? Not heartless, necessarily. People made choices in 1879 for reasons that had very little to do with their hearts and a great deal to do with the arithmetic of survival. Lord Ashton's position was more secure, which meant Catherine had been afraid of something, which meant, possibly, that Julian Vane, before he became this, had been something that required courage to choose. She found this thought more unsettling than she'd expected. She turned over. The Yorkshire wind did something significant against the windows. She thought, I am here. This is real. What are you going to do with it? She didn't have a full answer yet. But somewhere in the part of her that had been making quiet, careful decisions since she was 14 years old, something was already working on one. Julian Vane wanted to be impervious. He wanted to prove that he felt nothing. Isolde Caldwell, lying in the dark in a house that swallowed light, thought about that. and thought. The problem with proving you feel nothing is that you have to keep proving it. And the only reason you keep proving something is because you're not sure it's true. She closed her eyes. Outside, the wind pressed against the stone walls of Ravenswood, the way it had been pressing for 300 years. And the house held the way it always had, solid and cold and full of things that had never been said. For now. She slept. There is a specific kind of war that is fought without weapons. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, no moments that could be pointed to afterward and called the moment. Just two people in the same house, moving through the same rooms, breathing the same cold air. And both of them, in their different ways, refusing to yield. Isolde had been at Ravenswood for 11 days when she understood that this was what was happening. Not a marriage, not an arrangement. A war. The rules were unspoken, which made them more rigid, not less. Julian Vane had his methods. The deliberate silences, the rooms he occupied and then didn't invite her to leave. The way he occasionally said something designed to land on a bruise and then watched, with that measuring expression, to see if it did. He was good at it. He had been practicing on himself for 3 years. What he had not accounted for, what was becoming, Isolde suspected, an increasing problem for his experiment, was that she had been practicing too. 22 years of watching, of cataloging, of understanding exactly how diminishment worked and how it needed your cooperation to complete itself. She was not going to cooperate. But here is the thing about wars fought without weapons in cold houses in Yorkshire in the winter of 1879. They change people. Both people. Even the one who thinks they're only watching. It started with a book. Isolde had been using the library every afternoon since the second day, had simply appeared at 2 o'clock and stayed until the light went, and then appeared again the next day and the next. By the 5th day, it was a fact. By the 10th day, it was, in the unspoken grammar of Ravenswood, hers. Vane used the library in the mornings. She used it in the afternoons. They had achieved, without negotiating it, a division of territory that suited them both, which was itself a kind of intimacy, the intimacy of two people who have learned each other's rhythms without meaning to. On the 11th day, he came in at 3 o'clock. She looked up. He looked at her. Neither spoke. He went to his desk. 5 minutes passed. "What are you reading?" he said. She showed him the spine. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's my mother's copy." "I know. Her name is in the front." Isolde turned a page. "She told me to read it. She said it would be useful." "Useful for what?" "She didn't specify." He didn't ask to see the book. He didn't pursue it. He returned to his papers. But 10 minutes later, what did she mean? Useful. Isolde looked up. Vane was not looking at her. He was looking at his papers, pen in hand, with the studied casualness of a man asking a question he's been trying not to ask for 10 minutes. "I think," Isolde said carefully, "that she meant it would help me understand the house. The house. The people in it." A pause. "My mother," Vane said, still not looking up, "has a habit of communicating in layers. Whatever she appears to be talking about is rarely the only thing she's talking about." "I've noticed," said Isolde. And I find it clarifying," she said. "Like weather." Now he looked up. She had used his mother's word deliberately, and he knew she had used it deliberately, and she knew he knew. And the three of them, Vane, Isolde, and the ghost of his mother's phrase held the moment together for exactly long enough. Then Isolde went back to reading. She heard him exhale, very quietly, the sound of a man who has been outmaneuvered in a small way and is deciding what to do about it. He stayed in the library until the light went. He had never stayed past noon before. He came to her 3 days later with a cruelty so precisely aimed that she understood he had been preparing it. They were at dinner, the table still between them, 15 feet of mahogany. Though she had noticed that the distance had been, in incremental adjustments, she couldn't prove were intentional, slightly reduced in recent days. He had been almost, not warm, nothing as simple as warm, but present. More present than in the first week. The measuring expression had shifted into something that had more actual looking in it and less evaluation. She had been telling herself, with increasing frequency, that she was not here to be interested in Julian Vane, which was its own kind of information. Then he said it, casually, between the soup and the fish course, in the same even voice he used for everything. I received a letter from your father this week. She looked at him. He asks after your welfare, Vane said. He wanted to assure me that you are, his word, adaptable. That you have always managed difficult circumstances with equanimity. A pause. He also mentioned, in a postscript, that your mother was similarly disposed. That it was a quality of the Caldwell women. The room was very quiet. Isolde felt it land, felt exactly where he had aimed it, felt the precision of it. Not an accident, not a general cruelty, a specific one. He had found the thing, somehow from somewhere, perhaps from the Duchess, perhaps from Caldwell's letter itself, and he had used it. Her mother, used as evidence of her own disposability. Adaptable. As if Clara's endurance had been a character trait rather than a survival mechanism. As if the women of that family were simply made for this. Built to absorb whatever was put upon them and continue. She felt the anger. Real, genuine, the kind that comes from somewhere deep enough to be important. She took one breath. She picked up her wine glass. My mother, she said, her voice completely steady, endured a great deal that she should not have had to endure. I would not describe that as equanimity. I would describe it as the absence of other options. She looked at him directly across the mahogany. I have made it my particular project not to repeat it. Vane looked at her. The letter, she continued, was my father managing you. The same way he managed everyone, telling you what he thought you wanted to hear in order to make himself more comfortable. You should not mistake his description of me for an accurate one. She set down the glass. I am not adaptable. I am strategic. There is a difference. Adaptable suggests I bend, I don't bend. I choose when to move and when not to, and those are different things entirely. The fish course arrived. Neither of them looked at it. You're angry, Vane said. Yes. At me. At you for using it, she said. At my father for giving you the material. At a world that produces men who think a woman's capacity for suffering is a feature rather than a wound. She picked up her fork. Mostly at you, for tonight. He was quiet for a long moment. That was, he started. Don't apologize, she said. I don't want an apology. I want you to understand that it didn't work. What didn't work? She looked at him. Whatever you were testing, she said. It didn't work. I'm still here. I'm still this. Whatever you do, I'm still going to be this. You should factor that into your calculations. Vane's jaw tightened slightly. The first uncontrolled thing she'd seen from him. Barely visible. But there. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Then he picked up his fork. They ate the rest of dinner in silence. But it was a different silence than before. Not the silence of distance. The silence of two people who are very close, and both know it, and neither is ready to say so. The Duchess knew something had happened before Isolde said a word. She always knew. Isolde had come to understand that Eleanor Vane had developed, over 7 decades of watching people in this house, a sensitivity to the atmosphere that was almost meteorological. She could read a silence from 50 feet away. Isolde came in at 10 o'clock, sat down, opened the book with the weather in it. She had been bringing Bronte, which the Duchess had approved of with a firmness that suggested she'd been waiting for someone to bring it for years. And the Duchess said, without looking up from her own reading, "He did something." "Yes," said Isolde. "Was it about your mother?" Isolde looked at her. The Duchess had the grace to look slightly aware. "He asked me about you, in the first week. I told him very little. But I may have mentioned—" She stopped. "I should not have mentioned your mother." "No," Isolde agreed. "You shouldn't. He takes information and uses it. He has since he was a boy. It's how he processes people. He finds the architecture of them, the structural points, and he tests them. He's not doing it to be cruel." "I know," Isolde said. "He does it because if he finds the thing that would break someone and they break, he can dismiss them. And if they don't," the Duchess paused. "If they don't, he doesn't know what to do. He has no protocol for people who don't break. He's never needed one." Isolde thought about this. "He's been doing it to himself," she said slowly. "For 3 years. Finding the structural points in his own." She stopped. "Catherine. He keeps pressing on it, to make sure he's still protected by it. But a man who has genuinely stopped feeling doesn't need to keep checking." The Duchess looked at her very carefully. "Go on," she said. "He checks because some part of him knows the work isn't done. That there's still something there that could be—" She stopped herself. "Reached," said the Duchess quietly. The fire crackled. Outside Yorkshire. "He's not going to thank you for it," the Duchess said. "When you reach it. And I think you will. I think you may be the only person in 3 years who's come close. He's not going to thank you. He's going to try harder. He's going to be worse before he's better." "I know," said Isolde. "You should also know," the Duchess said carefully, "that I am not a well woman. I have perhaps 1 more winter in me. Possibly 2 if Yorkshire decides to be lenient, which it rarely does." She looked at Isolde with the direct, undecorated gaze of someone who has decided to stop using indirect language. "When I'm gone, you'll have no reason to stay. The arrangement will have served its purpose. You can leave. You should be able to leave with your head up and enough resources to build something of your own. I've already spoken to my solicitor about this, separately from my son. There will be something for you. Whatever happens." Isolde was very still. "Why?" she said. "Because your father sold you," the Duchess said simply. "And someone should have done this for your mother. And no one did. And I can't fix that. But I can. This. The room was very quiet. Isolde felt something happen in her chest. Not the grief-shaped thing, not the anger-shaped thing, but something else. The specific feeling of being seen accurately, of having someone look at your actual situation and call it what it was, without the decorative language, without the management. She had not known how much she needed that until it happened. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness cost something. The Duchess nodded. Once. The nod of someone who does not need the thanks, but accepts it. "Read," she said. "Start from the beginning. I want to hear it from the beginning." That night the wind came in from the north with serious intent. Ravenswood was built for Yorkshire winters. 3-foot stone walls, deep-set windows, fireplaces large enough to stand in. But there was a specific quality to a bad winter night in that house. A quality of being very small, inside something very large. Of the world outside reducing itself to sound and darkness and cold. And the fire becoming the whole of what mattered. Isolde couldn't sleep. She had given up pretending she might, and had taken her book to the small sitting room adjacent to her bedroom, where there was a fireplace and a chair and enough lamplight to read by. She was there for perhaps an hour before she heard footsteps in the corridor. They stopped outside her door. She looked up from her book. The footsteps did not continue. He was standing there. She could feel it. The particular quality of a nearby presence. The slight change in the atmosphere of a space when someone enters its edge. She waited. He knocked. 2 knocks, quiet. The knock of someone who has debated whether to knock and has decided only very recently. "Come in," she said. He opened the door and stood in it with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere without fully deciding to and is now dealing with the consequences of that. He was not dressed for company. No coat, no cravat, simply shirt sleeves, which in 1879 was the sartorial equivalent of arriving with your armor off, whether he intended it that way or not. He looked younger and tired, and something else that she didn't have a word for yet. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Nor could I," she said. He looked at the chair across from her. She did not invite him to sit in it, and she did not invite him. She simply returned to her book and let him make his own decision. He sat down. For a while, neither of them said anything. The wind moved against the windows. The fire did what fires do. 2 people sat in a circle of lamplight in the middle of a dark house, in the middle of a dark Yorkshire night, and breathed the same air. Then Vane said, "What I said at dinner. About your mother. I told you I didn't want an apology." "I know. I'm not going to apologize." A pause. "I'm going to tell you why I said it." She looked up. He was looking at the fire. Not at her, at the fire, which made it easier, she understood, to say whatever he was about to say. "When Catherine left," he said, "she wrote a letter. In the letter, she said that she had always known, with me, that she was secondary. That my work, the estate, the responsibilities, they came first. That she had never felt entirely real to me. That Ashton made her feel real." A pause. "I have thought about that letter for 3 years. I've thought about whether she was right." Isolde said nothing. She understood this was not the kind of conversation that benefited from response. "She was partly right," Vane said. "I was not. I didn't know how to make someone feel real to me. I knew how to manage situations and people, and I think I managed her. The way you said I managed my mother. He stopped. The way you told me on your first day not to do. The fire, the wind. You were right, he said, about my mother. I check on her. I haven't known how to do the other thing. For a long time I've told myself the other thing isn't possible for me. That Catherine removed it. She didn't remove it, Isolde said quietly. You removed it. She gave you a reason. You did the work. He looked at her then. She held it. She did not look away, and she did not soften it, because it was true, and he needed the true version more than the manageable version. That's a cruel thing to say, he said. Yes, she said. But it returns the agency to you. If she took it, it's gone. If you removed it, you can... She stopped. What? She looked at him across the lamplight, at the man in his shirt sleeves sitting in her firelight in the middle of the night, at the tiredness in his face, and the thing underneath the tiredness that had been trying to surface for 11 days and was getting closer. Decide differently, she said. Julian Vane looked at Isolde Caldwell for a long time. Then he looked back at the fire. I used your mother, he said quietly, as a weapon. Against you. That is not who I intend to be. I know, she said. That's why it surprised me. What did? That you did it. She turned a page she hadn't read. You're more frightened than I thought. He said nothing. The cruelty was fear, she said, not malice. You felt something shift, and you reached for the nearest sharp thing. I understand the impulse. A pause. I don't accept it, but I understand it. The wind, the fire. Miss Caldwell, he said very quietly. Isolde, she said. Without thinking, without deciding to, just, it was what came out. Because in this room, in this lamplight, with this wind, Miss Caldwell was wrong. It was the wrong distance. He looked at her. Isolde, he said, just her name, nothing else. But the way he said it, like something he was learning the weight of, made the fire seem suddenly very loud. She picked up her book. Her hands were completely steady, which cost her more than anything she'd done in 11 days. Good night, she said. He stood, moved to the door, stopped. The thing I'm frightened of, he said, without turning around. I should tell you, it's not that I'll feel nothing. I think I've known for some time that the nothing isn't real. She waited. The thing I'm frightened of, Julian Vane said, to the door of the room, in the dark, with the wind pressing against the walls of his house, is that I'll feel something, and it will matter, and then it will leave. He walked out. The door closed. Isolde sat in the chair for a long time. The lamp, the fire, her book, unread, open to the same page it had been on for 20 minutes. She read the same sentence 4 times. She gave up. She stared at the fire. Outside, the north wind pressed against 300 years of Yorkshire stone, and Ravenswood held the way it always had. But something inside it, something that had been sealed for 3 years, was beginning, very quietly, to move. There is a moment in every thaw when the thing that was frozen becomes more dangerous than the ice ever was. Ice holds. Ice is predictable. You know where it is, you know what it does, you learn to walk around it. But but water. Water moves. Water finds every crack and goes through it, and there is no architecture designed to keep it out once it has decided to go somewhere. Julian Vane had been ice for 3 years. Isolde Caldwell had been in his house for 3 weeks. What was happening now was not a thaw exactly. It was too careful for that, too slow, too heavily defended on both sides. But something had changed in the molecular structure of the house. Something that everyone in it could feel, and nobody was discussing. Mrs. Holt noticed that His Grace had begun to take his afternoon correspondence to the library. The Duchess noticed that Isolde came to their morning sessions with the distraction of someone whose mind keeps returning to a specific place and is being firm about not going there. And Julian Vane noticed, with the helpless accuracy of a man who has been trying not to notice anything for 3 years and has lost the habit of not noticing, that the house felt different when she was in a room he was not in. Smaller somehow. He found this deeply inconvenient. On the 19th day, he made a mistake. Not a cruel one this time. He had not reached for a sharp thing again. The dinner incident had cost him something. Some internal currency he couldn't name, but could feel the absence of. This was a different kind of mistake. Softer. More revealing. They had fallen into a pattern in the library. Afternoon light, separate books, the fire between them. Occasional conversation that was, he would not have admitted this, but it was, the best conversation he'd had in years. Not managed, not performed. She said what she thought, which was disorienting and then, gradually, the most restful thing he could imagine. He didn't have to decode her. She was simply there. Accurate and present and completely, consistently herself. He had been, on the 19th day, reading a letter that contained some frustrating news about a property matter in the north. He had read the relevant paragraph twice, and then he had said, without looking up, without making a decision to say it, "Listen to this," and read the paragraph aloud. Isolde had listened. And then she had said something about the property law in question, something specific, something that revealed she'd been thinking about these things, had opinions about them, had read about them. And they had talked for 40 minutes about something real, something that mattered. And somewhere in the middle of it, Julian Vane had looked across the room at this woman and felt something so uncomplicated and so warm that it took him a full 5 seconds to identify it. He was comfortable. He stopped talking mid-sentence. Isolde looked at him. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "I lost my train of thought." He had not lost his train of thought. He had found something, and it had frightened him, and he had pulled back so fast that the whiplash of it was almost physical. Isolde looked at him for a moment with those clear reading eyes. She said nothing. She went back to her book. And he sat there, in his chair, in his library, in his house, and understood that the experiment had gone catastrophically wrong, not because she had broken, because he had. The Duchess had a bad week starting on the 20th day. Not dramatically. Her decline was not the kind that announced itself with crisis and urgency. It was the quiet kind. The kind that doctors in 1879 described with careful language that meant, "The tide is going out, and we cannot stop tides." She was tired in ways she hadn't been before. The 10 o'clock sessions shortened to 40 minutes, then 30. She slept more. She ate less. Isolde adjusted everything without being asked. This was the thing that Vane watched, that he could not stop watching, from the edges of doorways and the careful distances he had installed between himself and what was happening to him. He watched Isolde with his mother and felt something move in his chest that he had no adequate language for. Other companions had been competent, technically adequate. What Isolde did was different. She paid attention in the way of someone for whom the person in front of them is the actual thing. Not a duty, not a task, not a situation to be managed. She sat with his mother through an afternoon when Eleanor was too tired to talk and simply held her hand and read aloud in a voice that was low enough to be restful and present enough to be company. She found the music room. Vane had no idea how. It hadn't been opened in 4 years, and played softly in the evenings. She asked his mother questions nobody had asked in years. What was Yorkshire like when she was young? Who was she before she was the Duchess? Eleanor Vane, who had been the Duchess for 50 years and had received very few inquiries about the person inside the title, bloomed in those conversations like something that has been kept from light for too long and suddenly, unexpectedly, finds a window. Vane stood in corridors and listened through half-open doors and felt the specific shame of a man who has provided everything material and withheld everything real, and watched someone else give the real things, and understood, for the first time with full clarity, what the difference costs. On the 23rd day, his mother called him in. Isolde was not there. He sat by the bed. She was in bed now, most of the day, which was new and not good. And she looked at him with the eyes that saw everything. "She's not going to break," his mother said. "I know," he said. "Do you know why?" He didn't answer. "Because she's already been broken," Eleanor said quietly. "By your father's equivalent. By a life that expected her to endure without complaint and called it a virtue. She came here already knowing the worst of what this house could do to her, and she decided to be here anyway." A pause. "You cannot break someone who has already chosen to survive you." Vane looked at his hands. "What are you going to do?" his mother said. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." Eleanor closed her eyes. Not dismissively, tiredly. "You've known since the 2nd week. You're just afraid of knowing it." He stayed until she slept. Then he walked out into the corridor and stood in the cold dark of Ravenswood and put his hand flat against the stone wall and felt the house hold. 300 years of cold stone holding against everything the North threw at it, and thought about what it meant to hold and what it meant to open. He stood there for a long time. Then he went to find Isolde. She was outside, in December, in Yorkshire, which was, objectively, an act of either great hardness or great need, and he wasn't sure which. She was standing at the edge of what had been, once, a formal garden. Still a formal garden in its bones, in the geometry of the paths and the stone borders, but gone long enough without attention that the bones were all that was left. His mother had loved this garden. Isolde was looking at it with the cataloging expression, taking inventory, quietly assessing its condition and what it would need. He came to stand beside her. She didn't look at him. "She's sleeping," he said. "I know. I checked before I came out." They stood in the cold. The December light was the particular white of Yorkshire in winter, thin and honest, the kind of light that shows everything without comment. The garden was bare. Brown stems, skeletal rose canes, the frozen shapes of things that would be something else again in spring. "My mother planted these," Vane said. He meant the roses. "The year she married my father. She said it was the first time she'd had a garden that was entirely hers." Isolde looked at the rose canes. "They need cutting back," she said, "before the new growth. If you cut them back properly, they'll come in stronger." A pause. Did she do it herself? The garden? Every year. Until she couldn't. When did she stop? He thought about it. 4 years ago, when my father died. She stopped her garden the year she lost him. Yes. And nobody has done it since. No. Isolde was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the bare branches of the trees at the garden's edge, gentler today than it had been, almost apologetic. "I'll do it," she said. "In spring, when the time is right. If I'm still here." He turned to look at her. She was still looking at the garden, profile to him, her breath visible in the cold air, entirely contained, and entirely, he understood, in control of what she'd just said and what she'd left open with it. If I'm still here. Not a plea, not a question. Just a fact held out like a stone. Here is the truth of this. Take it or leave it. I may not be here. What do you want to do with that reality? He had spent 3 weeks testing and measuring and evaluating, running his experiment with the detached precision of a man who had confused control with safety and safety with not feeling. And she had stood in his library and said what she thought and held his mother's hand and come out into a Yorkshire winter to look at a dead garden. And she had not broken, and she had not yielded, and she had not once, been anything other than completely, stubbornly, magnificently herself. He understood, standing in the cold beside her, that the experiment was not just over. It had been over for days. He had simply been standing in the wreckage of it, pretending to still be conducting it. "I owe you something," he said. She waited. Not an apology. You were right about those, but an explanation. The real one. Not the version I gave you about my mother needing care, which was true but incomplete, and you've known it was incomplete from the beginning. "Yes," she said. "I brought you here," he said, "because I wanted to prove something to myself. About what I was capable of feeling. Or not feeling." He stopped. "I thought if I took someone in your position, someone who had no power in the arrangement, who had to be here, I thought if I could be in this house with someone like that and feel nothing, it would confirm what I've been telling myself since Catherine left. The garden, the bare roses, the white light. And, Isolde said. "And I feel a great many things," Julian Vane said, "which I am finding extremely inconvenient." She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before. None of the calculation, none of the distance, none of the careful management of what he allowed to show, just a man, standing in the cold, having arrived somewhere he hadn't planned to arrive, and being honest about it. "I want to be very clear," he said, "about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying this changes the nature of the arrangement. I have no right to tell you what I feel and expect it to mean anything to you. I brought you here under circumstances that were wrong, regardless of what your father agreed to. I know what this has cost you. I'm not asking for anything." Isolde looked at him for a long time. "You," she said, "are remarkably bad at saying what you mean for someone so precise about everything else." Something moved in his face. "I'm aware." "Let me say it then," she said. She turned back to the garden, which made it easier, she found, to say the exact true thing. You brought me here to feel nothing. Instead, you feel something, and you don't know what to do with it, because the last time you felt something, it left. And you've spent 3 years building a life that makes leaving impossible. A closed house, a fixed routine, an experiment designed to confirm that you're unreachable, because if no one can reach you, no one can leave you. The wind, the bare branches. And now someone has reached you anyway, she said. And you're standing in your garden telling me you're not asking for anything, because if you don't ask, you can't be refused. And if you can't be refused, you can't be left. He said nothing. I understand the logic, she said. I even understand the fear. But Julian. His name, just his name, the first time she'd used it. You cannot build walls high enough. You have tried for 3 years. The walls don't keep the feeling out. They keep it in. He was very still. I am not Catherine, she said. I'm not going to perform your feelings for you and then leave when the performance gets tiring. I am exactly what you've seen for 3 weeks. I don't have another version. This is the whole of me. She turned to face him. I'm also not going to tell you it's safe, she said. I can't promise you that. Nothing is safe. Your mother is dying, and I can't stop it, and you can't stop it, and this garden has been dead for 4 years. And I can't fix that either. Not overnight. But I can cut the roses back in spring, if I'm still here. A pause. I would like to be still here. Julian Vane looked at Isolde Caldwell in the winter light of his dead garden, and the thing that had been sealed for 3 years, that he had closed with such competence, such thoroughness, such determined and deliberate care, opened. Not dramatically, not with collapse, just opened. A door very quietly, after a very long time. You called me Julian, he said. Yes, she said. You've been calling me Vane in your head. I could tell. I have. What changed? She looked at him. You stopped being Vane, she said simply. About a week ago. I was just waiting to be sure. He reached out, not for her hand. That would have been too much, too fast, too careless of the distance they had built and what had happened in it. He reached out and adjusted the collar of her coat, which had gone slightly askew in the wind. A small and useless and completely deliberate gesture that said, You are real to me. You are the actual person in front of me, and not a category, or an experiment, or a fear. Isolde went very still. Then she said, I'm cold. Yes, he said. You've been standing in a Yorkshire garden in December for 40 minutes. You've been standing here too. Yes. We should go in. Yes. Neither of them moved. Then he offered his arm, formally, correctly, with the careful protocol of a man who understands that the formality is not distance this time, but the opposite of it. The dignity of a thing being done properly. And she took it, and they walked back through the dead garden toward the house. Mrs. Holt saw them come through the door from the end of the corridor. She said nothing. But later that evening, she told the kitchen maid to lay the fire in the blue drawing room, the room that hadn't been used since the old Duke died. Because it seemed, she said, as though it might be needed. She had been at Ravenswood for 19 years. She knew what a thaw looked like. He came to his mother that evening. Not the checking visit, not the efficient inquiry after her health and comfort. He came and sat beside her bed and said, Tell me about the garden. When you planted it, what it was like. Eleanor Vane opened her eyes. She looked at her son, at his face, at the thing in it that she hadn't seen in 3 years. The thing she had stopped expecting to see and had not stopped hoping for. The way you don't stop hoping for things that matter, even when the evidence suggests you should. She told him about the garden. She told him how she had ordered the roses herself. From a catalog, one cold February before the wedding. Had sat at a writing desk with the catalog and her finger moving down the pages, choosing each one, thinking about what colors would look like in Yorkshire light. She told him about the year the frost came late and killed the first planting, and how she had gone out in the morning and found them dead and sat in the dirt and cried, which she had told no one at the time and was telling him now. She told him about the summer the garden was so full that she had cut roses every day for a month and still couldn't keep up with them, and how she had brought them inside and put them in every room until the house smelled like a garden. And his father had come home and stopped in the doorway and looked at her across the hall and said nothing. Just looked. The specific look of a man who is seeing something he loves so completely that words are inadequate. She talked for an hour. Julian Vane sat beside his mother's bed and listened to every word, not managing, not checking, not evaluating, just listening. Fully. With the part of him that had been closed for 3 years and was now, cautiously and with some effort, remembering how to be open. When she finished, she was tired. The good tired. The tired of having said something real, of having been actually heard. She told you to listen, the Duchess said. Not a question. She told me a great many things, Julian said. She told me I'd been checking on you instead of talking to you. She was right. I know. His mother looked at him. The old eyes, sharp and soft at once. She's going to be very difficult to live with, the Duchess said. She'll never pretend. She'll never manage her opinions to make you more comfortable. She'll call you on every single thing. I know, Julian said. You'll have to actually become someone worth being called on. I know that too. The Duchess looked at him for a long moment. Good, she said simply. She closed her eyes. He stayed until her breathing steadied and deepened into sleep. Then he stood, carefully, and moved to the door. Julian. He turned. Her eyes were still closed, but she was smiling. The full smile, the one that showed what her face had been at 30, at 20, at the age when she had sat with a catalog and chosen roses for a garden that was entirely hers. The blue drawing room fire is lit, she said, in case you were wondering what to do next. He looked at her for a moment. Good night, Mother, he said. Good night, my love, she said. He walked out into the corridor, stood in the dark for a moment. Then he walked toward the blue drawing room, where the fire was lit and the light was coming under the door, warm and specific in the dark of the house, and he knocked. He knocked, and she opened the door. That's where we left them. Julian Vane standing in the dark corridor of his own house, outside a room with a fire in it, having arrived somewhere he hadn't planned to arrive and done something as simple and as enormous as knock. And Isolde opening the door. I want to stay with that image for a moment. Because in 1879, England, in a house like Ravenswood, in an arrangement like theirs, a woman opening a door to a man who has spent a month trying to break her is not a small thing. It is not surrender. It is not weakness. It is the specific courage of someone who has decided, with full knowledge of the risks, to stop defending and start choosing. Isolde Caldwell had been defending since she was 14 years old. She was tired of defending. She opened the door. What happened in the blue drawing room that night? What was said, what was not said? The particular quality of two people sitting by a fire after a month of war and finding, to their mutual surprise, that the war had ended somewhere in a dead garden that afternoon. I'm going to leave to your imagination. Not because nothing happened, but because some things belong to the people they happen to. What I can tell you is this: when Mrs. Holt came to bank the fire at 11 o'clock, she found the room empty. Both of them gone, and the fire burned down to embers that were still warm. And there were 2 cups of tea on the table, and both of them had been drunk. She banked the fire. She said nothing to anyone, but she slept that night, with the particular ease of someone who has been carrying a worry for a long time and has been relieved of it. January came in like a door being shut. The cold that settled over Yorkshire in the first week of the new year was the serious kind. Not the bracing, almost bearable cold of December, but the deep cold. The cold that gets into stone and stays, that makes the light thin and gray and somehow both very clear and very far away. Eleanor Vane felt it, not in the way of someone who complains about weather. She had lived in Yorkshire for 50 years and had a Yorkshire woman's relationship with cold, which was to acknowledge it and proceed. But in the way of someone whose body has begun, quietly and without drama, to take stock of its remaining resources and make decisions about where to spend them. She knew. She had known since autumn. She had simply been waiting for the right people to be in the house before she allowed herself to know it properly. They were here now. She had one request, which she made on a Tuesday morning in the second week of January, when Isolde came in at 10 o'clock and found her more alert than she'd been in days. "I want to sit in the garden," Eleanor said. Isolde looked at her. "It's January. I'm aware of the month. It's also—" Isolde glanced at the window. The light was white and sharp. "Your Grace, Eleanor," the Duchess said. She had been saying this for 2 weeks. Isolde had been slow to comply, out of some instinct that the title was a protection for both of them. But Eleanor had decided she was done with protections. "And I didn't say I wanted to walk in it. I said I wanted to sit in it. There's a bench by the south wall that catches whatever sun there is." She looked at Isolde. "I planted the first rose 6 inches from that bench. I want to see where it is now." Isolde looked at her for a long moment. Then she went to find Julian. He came without being asked twice. Between them, not discussed, simply understood in the way that things between them were increasingly understood. They managed the logistics of moving an elderly woman who was proud and fragile in equal measure from her bedroom to the garden bench by the south wall, without making her feel managed. This required considerable skill from both of them. Eleanor sat on the bench, wrapped in so many layers she was approximately twice her usual size, and looked at the south wall and at the place 6 inches from the bench where a rose cane stood, brown and bare and technically still alive. Julian sat beside her. Isolde stood slightly back, understanding that this was not her moment. "Your father planted that one," Eleanor said. She was talking to Julian, but she was looking at the rose. "I chose it. He planted it. He said it was division of labor. I provided the aesthetic judgment, he provided the physical work, and between us we'd managed something worth having." A pause. "He was right, actually. That was what we were. He did what he was good at, and I did what I was good at, and we were better together than either of us alone. Julian was looking at the rose. I didn't know that, he said. About the planting. There are many things you don't know about your father and me, Eleanor said, without reproach. We didn't tell you everything. Parents don't. But I find I want to now. She turned to look at him, her son, this careful, difficult, tender, frightened man she had loved for 34 years and had not always known how to reach. He was afraid too, in the beginning. There had been someone before me, someone who had hurt him, and he came into our marriage with a quality of held backness, of keeping some essential part of himself in reserve. Julian was very still. I waited, Eleanor said simply, not passively. I didn't sit in hope. I was simply exactly myself, every day. And I didn't perform, and I didn't manage, and eventually he understood that I wasn't going to leave. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. And the held back part came forward. It took 2 years. She paused. It was the best part of him. Worth waiting for. The south wall caught the pale January sun. The bare rose cane stood 6 inches from the bench. Eleanor looked at it for a long time. Then she turned, not to Julian, but to Isolde. The look of a woman who has been watching carefully and has seen what she needed to see. Come here, she said. Isolde came, stood beside the bench. Eleanor reached up and took her hand. The same grip as the first morning, stronger than it looked. I am going to give you some advice, Eleanor said, and I want you to receive it as the advice of a woman who has been married for 50 years and has observed a great many things about what makes a life worth living and what wastes it. All right, Isolde said. Don't let him be held back, Eleanor said. Not because you need him to be forward. You don't need anything from him. You're the most self-sufficient woman I've met in 20 years, and I include myself in that comparison. But because the held back part is the best part. And it deserves to be out in the world. It deserves to be seen. She looked at her son. You have my eyes, she said, and your father's heart. That's an extraordinary combination. Stop treating it as a liability. Julian looked at his mother. He said nothing. But his jaw moved slightly, the way it did when he was holding something in. And Isolde had learned to read this, to understand that the holding was not coldness, but the opposite of coldness. That Julian Vane felt things so completely that he had spent years developing systems for containing them because he didn't know another way. Don't contain it, Eleanor said softly, as if she had read the same thing. Not here. Not with her. Not with me. Whatever time we have. Julian took his mother's other hand. The 3 of them sat by the south wall in the white January light. The Duchess, her son, the woman who had been sold to the house and had, by some alchemy of character and stubbornness and the very specific quality of her refusal to break, become something else entirely. The rose cane stood 6 inches from the bench. It was bare now. In spring, it would not be. She died on a Thursday in late January. Quietly, which was consistent with her character. She had never been a woman who made more noise than the situation required. And she applied this principle to the end. It was early morning, the specific gray hour before the light decides what it's going to be. And Isolde was with her. Not Julian. He had been with her through the night and had stepped out. Isolde had made him gently, firmly, in the way she'd learned to manage the things he resisted that were good for him, to sleep for a few hours. and Eleanor had waited, in the way that people sometimes do, for the room to be arranged the way they needed. They had been sitting in the almost dark, the fire low, the Bronte on the table unread because reading had stopped mattering and presence had become the whole thing. Eleanor had been drifting in and out, the shallow, slow breathing of someone whose tide is very far out. At some point, she became more present, opened her eyes, found Isolde's face. "Tell me your mother's name," she said. Isolde was still for a moment. "Clara," she said. Eleanor nodded, the nod of someone receiving something carefully. "Clara," she repeated. She should have had this. Someone sitting here. Someone who stayed. She closed her eyes again. "I'm glad you have it." Isolde held her hand. She was not going to cry. She was going to be steady. She was going to be what was needed. But something happened in her chest that was large and complicated and required a great deal of quiet management. "You did well," Eleanor said, very quietly. To the ceiling, or to the dark, or to whoever receives these things. "Both of you. You'll do well." Her breathing slowed. Isolde stayed. When Julian came in, an hour later, she had sent Mrs. Holt. She hadn't been able to leave the room. He stood in the doorway and looked at his mother's face and understood immediately. He crossed the room. He sat on the other side of the bed. He took his mother's hand, which was still warm. Isolde looked at him across the bed. She did not say anything. Some things don't need saying. Some things are simply witnessed, and the witnessing is the whole of what's required. He looked back at her, and they sat on opposite sides of Eleanor Vane's bed in the gray January morning, with the fire dying down and the light beginning to decide what it was going to be. And they held on, both of them, to the woman between them and to the fact of each other, and to the specific, strange, earned thing that they had built in this house in 3 months. That was nothing like what either of them had come here expecting. Nothing like what had been arranged for them. Entirely their own. The weeks after Eleanor's death had a particular texture. Not the dramatic grief of stories, not the collapse, the dark rooms, the inability to function. Julian Vane was not a man who collapsed, and Isolde Caldwell was not a woman who had the luxury of allowing it. And they were both, in their different ways, people who processed by continuing, by doing the next thing and the thing after that, and finding in the doing some structure that held them up while the grief did what grief does. They handled the arrangements together, quietly, competently, without performance. Julian handled the formal elements. Isolde managed the household, the correspondence, and the 100 small human things that surround a death that nobody plans for but everybody, at some point, faces. They were good at this, working together. They had complementary instincts. He saw structures, she saw people. He thought in sequences, she thought in textures. Together they didn't miss much. This was not, she told herself, a reason to stay. She had been telling herself this for 3 weeks. She was not entirely convincing herself. On a morning in early February, she found the letter from Eleanor's solicitor. Not addressed to her, addressed to Julian, but delivered to her by mistake, or not by mistake, because Mrs. Holt had been at Ravenswood for 19 years and occasionally arranged things. She brought it to Julian. He opened it, read it, handed it to her. She read it. Eleanor had left her enough to live on independently. A sum calculated, Isolde understood immediately, with precision. Enough to take rooms somewhere, enough to live, actually live, for a year or more while she established something. Enough to have options. Eleanor had given her options. She stood in Julian's study holding the letter and felt the things she'd felt that first morning in the Duchess's room. The feeling of being seen accurately, of having her actual situation acknowledged and addressed without the decorative language. Her mother had never had this. "You knew," Isolde said. "She told me," Julian said, 2 weeks ago. "I asked her not to. I told her it wasn't necessary, that you would be—" He stopped. "She told me that it was not for me to decide what was necessary for you, that you needed to have options that didn't depend on me." A pause. She was right. Isolde looked at him across the desk. "And you accepted that," she said. "I didn't love it," he said, which was the most honest thing he'd ever said about anything. "But yes, I accepted it." She looked at the letter, at the number, at the options it represented. "I've been thinking," Julian said, "about what I'm going to say to you. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks, and I have not arrived at a version I'm satisfied with, which is unusual for me and somewhat humbling." "Say it anyway," Isolde said. "Unsatisfied." He looked at her. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because the arrangement requires it. It doesn't. It's done. My mother is gone, and the formal terms of whatever your father agreed to are dissolved as far as I'm concerned. Not because I don't want you to have what my mother left you. You should have it. You should have more. But because—" He stopped. "I have spent 3 years building a life designed to confirm that I need nothing and no one. And you have been here for 3 months, and the life is unrecognizable. Not because you changed it, because I changed it. Because of you, but not by your design, just by your existence. By the fact of you being exactly yourself in rooms I had filled with emptiness and calling the emptiness by its right name." Isolde was very still. "I am not the man you were delivered to," he said. "I know that's not a high bar, but I would like the chance to become someone worth being chosen by. Deliberately. Without the arrangement. Without your father's debt or my mother's need or anything else that isn't. Just this. Just us. Whatever that is." The study. The gray February light. The letter in her hands. Isolde thought about her mother. About Clara choosing endurance because she had no other option. She thought about the decision she'd made on the edge of her bed in London, before she'd ever seen Yorkshire. The decision not to be diminished. She had not been diminished. Something else had happened instead. Something she hadn't planned for and hadn't wanted, and had arrived at anyway through some combination of his stubbornness and hers, and a dead garden and a library, and a woman who had asked for the Bronte and given back more than she'd received. The held back part is the best part. It deserves to be seen. She looked at Julian Vane, at the man who had bought her presence and discovered he'd bought far more than that, who had tried to feel nothing and discovered he felt everything, who was standing in his study in the gray February light, offering her not a role or a position or a correction to a debt, but the thing she'd never been offered, a choice, an actual choice, made freely. Hers. She set the letter on the desk. "I'm going to be very difficult to live with," she said. Something happened to his face. "I know. I won't manage my opinions. I know. When you retreat into the experiment, when you close off because you will, old habits take time. I'm going to call it what it is. I'm counting on it," he said. and meant it. She could tell. She looked at him for a long moment. "The roses," she said. "What about them?" "In spring, I said I'd cut them back if I was still here." She looked at him steadily. "I intend to cut them back." Julian Vane looked at Isolde Caldwell, the man who had bought a soul to break and found one that rebuilt him. "Then you'll need to stay through to spring," he said. "At least," she said. And the word hung between them, at least, large and undecorated and full of everything that comes after a door is opened in the dark by a woman who has decided to stop defending and start choosing. At least. More than at least. Everything maybe, but that was for spring. They were married in April? Which was Isolde's idea and Julian's relief. Because neither of them wanted a production, and both of them wanted it done. Wanted the formal world to catch up with the fact that had been true since somewhere around the 23rd day. When Julian Vane had come to a library at 3 in the afternoon and said, "Listen to this," and meant, without knowing he meant it, "I want to share things with you." The ceremony was small. Mrs. Holt cried, which she denied afterward with great conviction. The roses were blooming. Isolde had cut them back in March, correctly, firmly, with the decisive care of someone who knows what a thing needs and is not afraid to be necessary. And Julian had stood at the garden door and watched her do it, and said nothing, and thought everything. Lord Caldwell was not invited. This was not discussed. It was simply a fact, agreed upon without negotiation in the way that the things between them increasingly were, understood before they were spoken, held jointly, two people reading the same page. Charlotte, Isolde's younger sister, came. She was 16 now, and considerably more interesting than anyone had given her credit for. And she sat at dinner on the wedding evening and asked Julian a series of questions about estate management that were sharper than most questions he'd received from adults. And he answered all of them seriously, which Charlotte noted and Isolde witnessed and filed away as further confirmation of something she'd understood since a library in November. He was better than he knew. He had always been better than he knew. It was simply that nobody had stayed long enough to tell him. Isolde stayed. The roses came in strong that spring, stronger than they had in years, the cutting back doing what it was supposed to do, the difficult necessary work producing exactly what it promises if you do it correctly. The garden, which had been bones when Isolde arrived, became something else by summer. Not the garden Eleanor had tended. Something new. Something with its own character, its own decisions. The evidence of a different pair of hands with different instincts, but the same fundamental understanding of what a living thing needs to grow. Julian stood at the garden door on a July evening and watched Isolde move between the roses with the focused attention she brought to everything, and felt he had stopped trying to find adequate language for it. The language was always going to be inadequate, what he felt. Complete. In the way of something found. He had spent 3 years building a life designed to prove he needed nothing. He needed this. He was after some initial resistance that Isolde had called by its right name on multiple occasions, entirely at peace with that. And that is the story of Isolde Caldwell and Julian Vane. A father who sold his daughter. A duke who thought he wanted a soul to break. A dying woman who saw everything clearly from the beginning and arranged the pieces accordingly. And a dead garden that came back in spring because someone understood what it needed and was not afraid to do the hard thing. Neither of them broke. That was the point. That was always the point. If this story stayed with you, the cold house, the library, the roses, the knock on a door in the dark, tell me in the comments which moment got you. I read every single one. Don't forget to write which city you're watching from. And if you're new here, there are more stories. There will always be more stories. I'll see you next story.